Hi, I am Kevin Williamson, and this is How the World Works, where we talk about work and jobs we've had and the role of work in our lives, in our economy, in our social life. One of the problems these discussions have is that all my friends are writers, and today's guest, Klon Kitchen, is also a writer, but he's done a lot of other interesting things in his life. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
So 20 odd years ago, you are at Bryan College. Mm-hmm. You are studying Bible, mm-hmm. and you have an intention, if I recall, were you going to go into ministry?
I was going to be a seminary professor.
Seminary professor was your plan. What happened next?
So my senior year, I was a dual major, theology, philosophy, and my senior year, there was a scholar who came and did a series of talks at Bryan. His name is Don Carson, New Testament scholar, brilliant guy, kind of guy I wanted to be essentially at that time. And he and I ended up going for a walk around the quad. And he was at a seminary known as Trinity up in Deerfield, Illinois. And Don said, "Klon, you seem like a great guy. I'd love to have you up at Trinity." I had just recently gotten engaged as well to my wife, Tracy. And he said, but go be married for a year or two and be a part of a local church and then come to seminary. It'll be more useful to you and you will be more useful to me if you do that. And at that point it's like, okay, you're Don Carson. I'm just going to say, do what you think is right.
And you're 20?
Yeah, I'm 20. That's right. So we graduate. Trace and I get married a month after graduating. And we moved to Columbus, Georgia, where I had gotten a job as a high school teacher, teaching 9th through 12th grade Bible classes. So I wrote the curriculum for this school. The 9th grade was kind of a history of Israel. 10th grade was a New Testament survey. And then juniors were theology and apologetics. And then senior year was something called worldview, philosophy, and ethics. And so the way I would describe that is I would tell their parents, like, listen, 9th through 11th grade, I'm going to be helping your students draw big, dark lines in their worldview. But as seniors, I'm going to try and blur all that out and then spend the year kind of putting it back together for them as they go off to college and helping them think through that. So did that. I loved it. I loved teaching, had a great time. But then...
Happy, newlywed, new job, new town.
Living the dream.
Life is good.
Yeah, it was really great. It really was. I look back very fondly on those days, and I loved the students, and the school was great, and they were very kind to me. But about that time, we were getting ready to go into the 2000 election campaign. So I graduated college in '99, and for the first time, really, I started paying attention to politics, and I found that I had a deep interest in foreign policy. I found it fascinating. I had never really thought about it before. And it really began to resonate with me. And over the course of that year, I started thinking, maybe I want to try and get into this world. This is really cool. But of course, here I am, kind of this theology, philosophy major, and I want to now go into foreign policy, and I'm trying to map out some way toward that. And this is before 9/11. And so what I got in my brain was, I know terrorism is kind of an issue, right? We had the 98 embassy bombings. And I thought...
First World Trade Center bombing.
Exactly right. Yep, the blind shake. And I said, I wonder if I could pivot my kind of theological training to working counterterrorism issues. There's obviously a nexus there. And so I got it in my head that I wanted to be an FBI agent. And I convinced my lovely and incredibly over-trusting wife that we should sell everything, essentially, that we had, move to Washington, D.C. without jobs so that I could pursue a career in the FBI.
Did you know anyone who worked for the FBI?
No, there was no strategy. This was a terrible plan.
I saw Silence of the Lambs, and that looks like fun.
Let's see, they carry guns. That's cool, and yeah, I mean, like this is fun stuff. And sure, of course I can make it. The world's my oyster. I mean, very little thinking. And I'm sure, looking back, I'm sure we put our parents through like unbelievable concern. But to their credit, I mean, they largely just said, okay, go for it.
Nothing would ever get done that is interesting if it weren't for people who are too young and stupid to really calculate the risks.
Yeah, that's right. But I tell you, as the parent of a child who's now 19, I would have opinions on this strategy.
I imagine you would.
Yeah. So anyways, there's more to that story. But I eventually, I end up moving to D.C. and I end up, we started attending a local church. And at that church is, at this point, the FBI's director of recruitment. And so I get to know him. And we go out one Sunday after church, we go out with he and his family to Generous George's Pizza Palace in Alexandria, Virginia. And he's very kind and very patient with me, and he talks to me. But at the end of it, he essentially says, yeah, there's no way. This isn't going to happen for a lot of reasons. And I remember walking out of that lunch. I'm a pretty resilient guy. I typically don't kind of get broken up on things, but this one kind of was a gut punch. And I looked at Tracy and said, the one person who could definitively say no just said no, and I don't know what to do now. So at about that time, I had gotten an entry-level position with a company called Periscope, and Periscope was a type of news database, and my job was, I was called the nation's editor. So I would do open source, meaning unclassified, just internet research. And I would inventory militaries and I'd write reports. So this is how many tanks Russia has, what their Air Force looks like, that kind of thing. And then a lot of our clients were other news organizations and some departments and agencies in the US government. And they would just use it as a part of the way that they kind of filled out their knowledge base. But because I've got my eye on the ball and I still want to be a counterterrorism guy, I talk to my bosses and I say, how would you guys feel if I started building a terrorism database? If I did these kinds of reports, but on terrorist groups? And they said, sure, give it a go. We'll see if anybody's interested. So then 9/11 happened. And on September 11th, 2001, I had written and published 2 reports. One was a group that everybody would know, Hezbollah, and another was on this group who had done the 98 embassy bombings and the USS Cole bombing in Yemen in 2000, and it was Al-Qaeda. And so quite literally overnight, my name became associated with someone who knew something about Al-Qaeda.
How much work had you done on Al-Qaeda at this point?
Oh, minimal. I mean,
a month of research?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, probably closer to 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
But there wasn't a lot out there. I mean, it was this, obscure group. Mm-hmm. There were no real articles. I mean, there was some stuff. But I, kind of pulled it together and among our clients at Periscope were agencies like the CIA and the Department of Defense and those kinds of people. So within a matter of weeks, I found myself in the E-ring of the Pentagon in a conference room full of very serious people interviewing for the U.S. intelligence community to become a counterterrorism intelligence professional. And within just a few weeks after that, I showed up for my first day of job or first day of work. And that began my career as an intel officer and a guy who does national security and, at that time, counterterrorism for a living.
It's an interesting supply and demand problem. It's an example I've used a number of times, and it's an unfair comparison, but I like it. It's that, on the day those attacks happened, the U.S. government had, I want to say, 47,000 revenue agents, and the bin Laden desk was 6 people.
That's right.
Or something like that.
That's right.
So yeah, there were only 6 people working on it, so number 7 was probably a good
really
place
important.
to be.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
So to the extent that you can tell us about what you did in that capacity, what was that work like?
Yeah, so over the course of a career, it varied quite a bit. The early days involved me working with the Department of Defense. I was attached to Joint Special Operations Command, which is a special forces organization, and was focused on the bin Laden hunt. So actually looking for he and Zawahiri and a couple of others. And that would involve deploying and doing that type of support work. And did that for several years. I'm profoundly thankful that I did it. I don't miss it. It's a high tempo, high intensity, high cost work, but they're amazing professionals who continue to do that work, and it's critical.
So a day in the life is like what? I mean, you're reading, you're doing interviews, you're writing reports, you're doing what kind of stuff?
Well, so again, it kind of varied. So in the early days, so it's much more formalized now. In the early days, we were building this as we flew, and what was especially needed was subject matter experts who could then be operationally relevant. And so what that meant was the military uses a term called chopped. So I was chopped to JSOC, which meant essentially my home department said, here, JSOC, take this guy and do whatever you want with him so that he can augment what you're doing. And so my job in that role was to bring what we call national level intelligence, so all the satellites and all source information, all that kind of stuff. I was the conduit through which that information flowed to these units. And we would use that for the specific work of trying to find bin Laden and target and do operational capture and kill missions and things like that. My work normally consisted of like facilitating all of that, being a subject matter expert to augment what they were doing. But then when we were actually deployed forward and doing activities, you would do what's called sensitive site exploitation. So if you take down a target, experts will kind of flow in, immediately start doing collection. And what do we find? Okay, I'm reading this paper, it says this. And the idea was to build follow-on targets in rapid succession that you could immediately kind of execute and move out on before they had a chance to squirt, to kind of go to ground or hide in another place. And then we would also support what's called battlefield interrogation, right? So we've got a detainee for the same purpose. I need to learn everything they know. So, we would facilitate all that. And there's all kinds of other stuff that we did. But essentially it was rapid succession, ongoing targeting missions, trying to move up the chain toward bin Laden, from couriers all the way up to the man himself.
So less of the stuff you like and more of the stuff you don't like. What is the stuff you don't like?
Well, then it was the administrivia of being a manager.
Administrivia.
Yeah, that's
I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yeah,
word
yeah.
before.
That
is a great one. I'm going to use that.
It's the performance evaluations and budgets and dealing with employees who are difficult, that kind of stuff. And it was less of the hey, I'm out there kind of running and gunning and doing cool, interesting things and stuff I can't really talk about, but you understand it's pretty cool. But it's funny because as I've progressed in my career, it's the stuff I used to hate that I actually kind of like now. I like leading teams. I like building teams. I like coaching team members and setting them up for success. I like that stuff now.
The people management aspect of that must be interesting because, immediately after 9/11, we're first in Afghanistan. It's not as though the endeavor were entirely resource unconstrained, but there were a lot of resources available, and people were very motivated, and there was a sense of urgency. And you, as someone who's also worked in nonprofits and in journalism, understand what a resource constrained organization where people are not feeling very urgent, sometimes anyway, can feel like. But then over the years, as this just becomes normal, and this is just how life is, and we've got an ongoing counterterrorism operation and the cybersecurity stuff that you're into as well, the sense of mission, I would have to imagine, and the sense of urgency doesn't go away, but it becomes less intense. So how does that affect how you manage people and run an organization? So
from my experience, until I left that part of the government, was still in the heydays. I mean, the biggest constraints we faced were space. So a billet is just like a position. Somewhere on an Excel spreadsheet we had 10 billets or 10 spots for people. Well, at that time we were literally hiring 3 people for every billet, under the assumption that the money and positions were just going to keep flowing year after year. And so we figured, okay, we'll figure it out. Like, we have to have bodies. We'll figure it out. Yeah. I mean, that's really the way we operated for almost a decade. And that was largely true. what I experience in terms as time goes on, so even right now, so here we are 22 years later, counterterrorism hasn't gone away in terms of its national importance and kind of as a critical mission, but we've got other problems, and thankfully, because we've spent 2 decades on this, we've gotten better at it and we're more efficient and we're not creating everything on the fly now. We've got systems and we've got processes and we've got proven methodologies, and those are being implemented, and that allows you then to kind of routinize some of this and make it more normal, and we've done that. So that's largely, I think, a sign of success, to the degree that it doesn't lead to complacency. And from the intelligence community's perspective, I have no doubt that we are not complacent. Policymakers are a different story, but I don't control that. But now we're focusing on, as and this is helps explain a little bit of my professional transition. Cyber concerns and broader technology influences on national security are something I've spent almost as much time on now.
Yeah. So you take off the boots and you put on the wingtips and you go take a desk job for a while, and that was doing what?
I was a manager. I became part of the problem. So I was a team lead and a manager, and slowly marching up the kind of bureaucratic food chain. And you worked at the National Defense University? So I did the kind of the intelligence desk job thing until, let's call it 2010, I think. And then at that point, even though it was a desk job, it was still high tempo work. And so I had the opportunity to go to the National War College, and I was originally sent there to get a master's degree. So I go there in 2010, I get a master's degree in a couple months. And then the school asked me to stay on as a fellow and to be a graduate school instructor. And so I get permission from my home agency, and I stay at the school. So I'm still an employee of the U.S. government, but I'm on a rotation at the National Defense University, where for 4 years I teach grad school to national security professionals like me, both from the United States and partner and ally countries.
So you ended up being a professor after all.
I did, and I loved it. I loved teaching. I still love teaching. And this included both civilians and military personnel. So I did that for 4 years, and I really did love it. I enjoyed it very much. One of the last things I did before going on that rotation involved what we'll call strategic communications and influence. Mm-hmm. And a part of what I did there was I was given the opportunity to establish an informal advisory board of the chief marketing officers from a couple of leading companies, including some technology companies. We would give them a clearance, we would bring them in, and we would tell them, like, hey, here's a communications or an influence campaign that we're trying to think through. Can you help us think through, as a professional communicator, how we would go about doing this and measuring effect and that kind of thing? And it was about this time that that this whole world of kind of data-driven marketing was really coming online, was becoming a thing. And so I started getting really fascinated by that. And then I go to the National Defense University, and one of the courses I develop and teach is on strategic communications. And I remember sitting in my office deciding, like, okay, this is my thing. I'm now going to pivot to cyber and technology, because I just see these worlds colliding with national security going forward. And so I spent a couple of years really trying to hone my expertise on those things, thinking, writing, speaking, that kind of thing. It wasn't long after that Ben Sass from Nebraska became a newly elected senator. His chief of staff,
one of the last grown-ups in American politics, which is why he didn't last very long.
Exactly right. He fought a good fight, and like any sane person, decided he had enough.
Yeah.
But his first chief of staff.
I don't want that to sound dismissive, by the way. I like Ben Sass a lot, and
no,
I'm a big fan.
No, I think both of us are completely empathetic with kind of how he feels about these things. Anyways, his first chief of staff was a mutual friend. And that man was kind enough to give Ben some of my writings on these issues. Ben found them interesting and invited me to come speak with him. So I did, and this was like this is quintessential Ben Sass.
He's an unusually smart guy.
Oh yeah, no. You're largely just kind of keeping up.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know something, he catches on pretty quick. But foreign policy and national security was actually something that he had not spent a lot of time on, and he was a voracious consumer of information.
Didn't come up a lot in Nebraska.
Yeah, I'd say. But I remember our first meeting, and at that time he scheduled himself in 7-minute increments. And so we started with, okay, Klon, we've got 21 minutes. I want you to talk about 3 things, go. Right? That's how it started. Right? And it's just quintessential Ben. Well, so, okay, here's 3 things to think about. And we ended up going for like 45 minutes or whatever. And he says, okay, I want you to come back. I want you to tell me 5 things you can talk about. I'll choose 3 of them again, and we'll do that. It's like, okay, great. So we do that. And, it wasn't long after that his chief of staff comes to me and says, listen, come be Ben's national security advisor. He's very serious about these issues. He wants to do some work on national security and cybersecurity. Come on, this will be fun. We're going to make a dent. Let's do it. And as I said, by that point in my career, I'd kind of gotten to the point to where it was like, all right, I'm not super jazzed about everything that's kind of ahead of me here. I feel like I've done that. And so this was cool. I remember thinking to myself, even at that point, Ben has a healthy distaste for this job, and that makes me want to do it with him. Like, okay, this guy wants to just kind of go in there and make a dent and maybe break some stuff, and I'd be happy to help him do that.
Yeah.
He's a very compelling guy. So I go do that. I spend 3 years as his national security advisor, learn a lot about the legislative process. He built a team, like at that point, still one of the most high capacity, high functioning teams I've ever been a part of, just in terms of like pure horsepower, just really, really rock stars. And it was a great opportunity to kind of figure out, okay, how does Congress work or not? And how does a policymaker on the legislative side, I'd mastered the executive, understood that. How does the legislative side work? And while it wasn't always a fun experience, and I have no intention of kind of going back to the Hill,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't trade it for anything. And incredibly helpful for me as a professional.
So at this point in your career, you've done a lot of cool and interesting things. But one of the cool things that you have not done at this point is make a whole lot of money.
That's true. that is true.
Government work, it's a healthy salary and good benefits and all that. But you are not kicking it in the Caribbean on your yacht at this point in life.
No.
And you lined up a pretty big job with a big famous technology company, and it looked like there was going to be a big change in life for the Kitchen family, and then it didn't work out. You mind telling me that story? Because as you know, all of my best work stories are about getting fired.
Oh yeah.
So
that's right.
You didn't get fired,
No.
but you got
Yeah. So so as after 3 years working on the Hill, had decided like, okay, I've kind of learned this. I get it. Want to think about something new. And yes, a very large technology company actually reached out to me, and recruited is probably an overstatement. The senior executive called me and said, I want to have lunch, and I want to tell you about a position, and I want you to give me your resume by the end of the day. So call that whatever you want.
yeah.
It was a lovely invitation is what it was. So we went to lunch, and they were establishing a new position. It was going to be I think it was like director for cybersecurity policy. Big job, cool job, amazing company, all kinds of cool things to go along with it. And started going through the process. Kind of flew through the process, right? Met all the right people, had the conversations. HR's talking to me. Well, we had kind of come to an agreement on what comp would be. It was significantly more than
Working on the Hill.
Well, I was trying to think if it was more than like my salary up until that point cumulatively. It was a lot. It was very attractive.
Yeah.
And then after multiple calls a week, conversation just kind of went cold. And we're at that point where we're like, well, okay, maybe there's just some kind of process that this is going through, let it ride, no big deal. 3 weeks in, no messages, start kind of pinging politely, hey, just want to check in, is there anything else you need? Get nothing back. Now I'm starting to get a little concerned.
It's a bad feeling.
Yeah, it's not super awesome. And by this time, because of the way schedules had worked, everything, I've given notice to the senator, I'm on my way out. Like, that's how far these conversations really were. And I remember there was a Friday night. Tracy and I were sitting on the couch. We put the kids to bed, and we're watching, some movie. And it's about 9 o'clock on the East Coast. I get a call, and it's this wonderful, wonderful HR representative who I've been dealing with for weeks, who's been truly great. And she says, Klon, I've got some bad news. We've decided to go a different way. And I said, okay. I would love to know why. My impression was that things were going exceedingly well, and that, frankly, that this was kind of done.
You didn't know there was another way.
I didn't know there was another way. I thought I was the way. And she said, no, this has nothing to do with, you've been wonderful. Everybody who has talked to you has said, you're great, and we actually would love you. And perhaps, at this point, I don't know how, this may have just been HR speech, but it's like, in fact, we'd like to continue talking to you about other possibilities. That never happened. I said, okay, I assume you found a preferred candidate. She said, yes. And I said, okay, can you tell me anything about the, well, I can't tell you his name, but I'll give you some background. And, this person had an undergraduate degree in computer science from, I think, Stanford, a law degree from, I think, Yale, and had just recently left a very senior political appointee position in the administration. I was like, well, okay. I mean, if you're going to losing out to a unicorn like that is about as good as you can get. I said, I totally understand. I said, I'm obviously very disappointed. I would love to keep having a conversation with you. But, I wish you all nothing but the best and that kind of thing. So I hang up. And, man, like.
Not a fun conversation with the wife.
Well, she's obviously picking up on things sitting next to me as I'm having this conversation.
Yeah.
So she's put two and two together. And again, man, I'm like, Tracy, so you understand. But like, what I didn't get from her was fear. Oh my gosh, what does this mean? Like, I'm feeling all that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm out of a job. Like, I got 2 weeks, I think. And the one thing I had that I thought for sure just completely fell. And I think we were going into like December, and I was like, there's no one who's going to hire me in December. Like,
it's not a great job hunting season. I
am starting from scratch with like no buffer, which was a position I had never thought I would. That just never crossed my mind that I would be doing that. Well, anyway, so all that's in my head. None of that is coming out of her mouth, and all she is doing is like, "You okay?" Like she's engaging me and just being awesome. And man, I felt I don't know that I've ever felt that feeling before or since, where I was just at a loss. I had no answer. Like, the gravity of the situation set in, like, okay, this is a thing. And I don't know what to do. Like, I don't have a plan. I don't know what to do here. So we talked about, just kind of processed out loud for maybe 10, 15 minutes. And I just remember looking at her and just like, I'm going to go to bed.
Often a good idea.
Honestly, I would love to tell you that was an intelligent, wise decision that I made. I'll be honest with you. I think it was pure escapism.
Yeah.
I think it was just like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to drive myself crazy thinking about this. I'm like sad and I'm scared. And I don't know what this means. So I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to lay down and I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'll deal with it then. And that's really what I did. And the next morning, I was better. I mean, I wasn't like giddy. I still had some real decisions to make. But sun was up, kids are there, things are fine, we'll figure it out. And, by God's grace, they were. I ended up finding opportunities. And that's shortly thereafter is when I kind of started moving into the think tank world and the kind of public intellectual writing stuff.
Yeah, the first part of a situation like that is always the worst part, I find. But the scramble's not any fun either.
No.
When you're trying to figure out, well, I've got to, pay the bills, and you've got, a bunch of kids, and not a huge bunch of kids, but a fair bunch of kids.
Yeah.
And, you are not a happy-go-lucky bachelor with no expenses and no responsibilities or something like that. When you're 27 and single and broke, you've never been 27 and single because you were married young, but you can afford to be broke for a while. It's not so bad.
That's right.
And it's not off anyone's, no one's problem but your own.
Just real quick, I think one of the things, with the benefit of hindsight, I think part of what was going on there, there was the immediacy of the, how am I going to satisfy needs and that kind of thing. But I think what it did fundamentally is it shook my identity. And as I've gotten older, I've realized how much this is a part of my identity. But it shook my identity as a provider and a protector for my family. Mm-hmm. That was disorienting,
Because it made you understand how tenuous the position can be.
I spent time and I made a series of self-referential notes that I still keep. And the first one was, nobody owes you anything. I hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
There was no mistake here. Nobody was being mean to me.
Yeah.
I wasn't owed this. I couldn't claim it as a right. I just thought it was going to happen. And I had been good at my jobs and people liked me. And so there was no evil character to blame.
My version of those notes is I have a folder I keep that says, "You are not smart" on it. Yeah. And I have some stock option certificates in there from a job I had once that are completely worthless, and a few other things of that nature.
Yeah.
Where'd you grow up?
So my folks divorced when I was 3. Mm-hmm. And so that meant a lot of my growing up period was split between largely Atlanta, Georgia, and then my dad was in the military, so wherever dad was, gotcha. I would see him during the summers typically. And then after I graduated high school, my mom and stepdad moved to Florida. And then really I never was home again after that. So I went to school at a small Christian liberal arts school in Tennessee. So I was in Tennessee. Is
that named for William Jennings Bryan?
Yeah, I went to Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee, home of the Scopes monkey trial.
Okay. So that makes sense then. Yeah.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And
no Clarence Darrow College there.
No Clarence Darrow College.
That's too bad.
Yeah. So
they'd be great at crosstown rivals.
That's right. We would definitely steal each other's mascots.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I consider actually Tennessee home because I was actually born in Nashville and then I went to college and kind of stayed there for a while. So Tennessee is what I consider home.
Did you have summer jobs and stuff like that when you were a kid? What'd you do? Did you work at a fast food restaurant? Did you?
Let's see. Most summers, so let's see, I was 16. So summers of my sophomore, junior, and senior year were spent as a lifeguard at a Salvation Army camp in Columbus, Georgia. Not Columbus, Georgia, Jasper, Georgia. There's a camp called Camp Grandview. And I was a lifeguard. And so I spent my summers in a lifeguard chair or in a pontoon boat on a lake.
Still a good swimmer?
Yeah. Funny story, I swam before I walked. It's an odd family story, but my dad and stepdad were friends. And so when I was very, very young, before I could walk, my stepdad would be treading water in the deep end. My dad would go to the end of the diving board, and I'd be in diapers, and they would drop me in the deep end, and I would, kind of paddle up to the top and kind of make my way to the side. And so water has always been like this kind of second home. I've always been incredibly comfortable in the water. I love the water still. And still a good swimmer.
At what point, it sounds like maybe it was in college with this visiting lecture you talked about, but at what point did you sort of get a larger imagination about what was possible for you in life? Because not knowing anything about the people you grew up with, I would imagine your career looks not very much like that of most of the people you went to high school with. So.
Yeah, the stuff that I've been able to do, I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
In college. I honestly think that's been a little bit of an incremental discovery.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember at least a moment where I thought, oh, well, here's the great big wide world, and I'm now charting a path through it. I think when I was given the opportunity to join the U.S. government,
Mm-hmm.
I discovered a world I didn't know existed, and I wanted to explore that world.
Yeah.
I'm going to do some cool stuff here that I never thought I'd be able to do. So I'm going to do that. And then that's just, slowly given me a view into other aspects of that world. So that kind of expands the national security awareness, which then leads me into policy, which then leads me into politics, which then leads me into kind of think tank public commentary, right? And at some point I looked at myself and I said, I've got, even for people who've been in this work, my career seems to be a little more diversified even than theirs.
Yeah.
A lot of them have been in this lane and they've kind of stuck to that. And I was much more of a rolling stone. I would do something, I would seemingly master it, and then I'd want to do something else, and then I'd want to go master that.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I was actually on a trip to New York, and I met some guys who worked in private equity. And I knew there was such a thing as Wall Street. Probably at the time, or at least when I was in high school, if you had asked me what people did there, I would say they were stockbrokers, which is not what they are, of course.
Right.
But anyway, so I met these guys, and they're impressive guys. But I remember thinking that there's nothing really special about these people. I mean, yeah, they're smart and they work hard, but what they've done is they've found this occupation, they've learned a lot about it and applied themselves to it, and they know a lot about this one particular thing. I could do this thing probably if I wanted to. It's not what I want to do in life, but previously I thought of there's this sort of special magical class of people who just do this thing or that thing, and it's not really that. It's they are just sort of ordinary people who've either through good luck and hard work and a combination of other things happened into these careers that from the outside seem very, very mystical. Because if you're not doing it, it's not just Wall Street or finance or the kind of work you've done. Journalism is this way, government work is this way, sometimes police work is this way, that people who haven't done it on a day-to-day basis, at least for a few months, just have a really hard time understanding of what it's like. I remember a conversation I had with a guy later in life. He had this big, beautiful home in Lower Merion, Pennsylvania, the main line, and it wasn't to my taste, but it was a really nice place. And I asked him, I was like, "What do you like? I don't want to buy this house, but I would like to be able to have the sort of resources where I could do something like that. What do you do?" And he's like, "Well, you know what I do? I'm the president of the XYZ Trust Company." I was like, "Yeah, I know, but what do you do? What do you actually spend your days doing?" And it took me a while to kind of figure it out. It took him a while to explain it, because once you've been doing something for a long time, it's just what you do, and you forget how to explain it to people, and or to people who have no frame of reference to begin with. Like if you're talking to someone else in your profession or who does something adjacent to it, you can explain yourself pretty quickly. But to someone who doesn't have any kind of background in it, it takes a while to do that. Because there's a sort of proverb that you don't really understand a subject very well until you can explain to someone who doesn't understand it. And I think that's true of it. So you go through this disappointing process, and tell me about the work you do now.
Okay. So, so part of
what do you do?
So what would you say you do here?
What do you say you do here?
I am the managing director of a strategic advisory firm in Washington, D.C. that specializes in foreign policy and national security consulting.
So what kind of people hire a firm like yours?
So essentially, our clients include globally influential and relevant companies who need to understand and engage the U.S. national security enterprise. So that's the policymakers who do national security. That's the the defense leaders and intelligence community, like where the equities represented by those stakeholders are equities that global companies have to understand and kind of navigate. So for example, a company who wants to understand, hey, where's U.S.-China policy going, and what is this going to mean for me and my supply chain? And I'm dependent on semiconductors that are made in Taiwan. Does the U.S. government think that there's going to be a war in Taiwan anytime soon?
So if you're a company that gets 54% of its revenue from the sale of cell phones manufactured in China, you might care about that sort of thing.
Those are the kinds of companies that might have.
I'm not asking you about specific.
Right. Those are the kinds of companies who would have who have an interest in what we know. So it's in one sense it's a very DC kind of consulting firm, but one of the real utilities, I think, and the thing that is a little bit of our magic sauce, is that we're not just trusted and valued by the companies, but we're actually trusted and valued by the government. The government has a high, and we actively cultivate this and defend it. They have a high confidence that when we are talking to our clients, that we are accurately representing the government's thinking and interests and why they're doing things, which is critically important. And they also have high confidence that when we're describing to them, the government, the interests of our clients and why these issues are perhaps more complex or more intricate than they appreciate, that we're not just carrying water. We're a bunch of national security professionals who are fundamentally, as a core principle of our business, committed to the security of the United States. Yeah. And it's the kind of work that, again, I didn't know existed. But it
might not have existed.
Yeah, well, it didn't. Yeah, I mean, our company's a decade old.
Yeah.
But it is, I feel like I caught a unicorn. Like, I live in this amazing place now where I live at the intersection of technology, which is a passion, national security, which is an expertise, and business, which is an interest.
Yeah.
You know, and I love it. And it's very compelling work. Again, some of the best people I've ever had the privilege of working with.
Yeah. You know, I was thinking about this because there's this antitrust action against Google that's kicking off. You know, in the 90s, you're only a few years younger than I am. I think maybe 4. But you know, in the sort of early heyday of the technology industry, and they did not lack confidence. And some people might have even said that there was a kind of arrogance in the industry. I remember that Bill Gates used to brag about the fact that Microsoft had no office in Washington, D.C., because it was irrelevant to what they were doing. Then, of course, there was the Microsoft antitrust case. And I remember that. I remember someone explaining to Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson how a mouse works and you know, what an operating system is for a computer. And I thought, maybe these aren't the people who should be making that decision about this stuff, because they clearly don't understand the issues. But again, it was the very early days of the stuff when people were sort of figuring that out. But that's become a whole huge diversified industry of people who say, you know, particularly we're in technology, we're a multinational business just by the nature of what we do. Some of these technology businesses have users in countries they didn't even know they had until, like, it just shows up suddenly. Oh, we've got someone using us here and there. And we have a government that is, you know, in my view, too large and does too many things, but is certainly spread out and has a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, and makes decisions based on, you know, XYZ, you know, legitimate policy goals, short-term politics, and other sorts of things that will have sometimes just existential effects on businesses that they weren't even thinking about when they were considering those things. And maybe they shouldn't have been thinking about, but sometimes maybe they should as well. I remember I wrote a big piece about soybean farmers a few years ago. And soybean farmers in the United States are a really, really sophisticated multinational group. They can actually, they would be good for some of your former colleagues, because they would tell you, like, you know, well, this Chinese sub-minister of agriculture is the one who gets real talkative after his third drink.
That's right.
And that sort of thing. But, you know, they also had an office in China, I think they said for 20 years before they sent their first shipment of soybeans there, because it takes a long time to build up those kinds of relationships. So I certainly understand. And they got, of course, wrecked by, you know, 6 months worth of idiotic tariffs. So some people look at this from the outside, and it looks like this, you know, kind of gross incestuous relationship between, you know, technology and government, and this sort of swampy thing in Washington. But at the same time, it's a legitimate thing. This is how business gets done, and businesses have real, you know, political vulnerabilities. Certainly overseas, but also, you know, in the United States. You know, one thing I tell people is that it's interesting how much our politics compresses once you cross the border. I remember one time hearing Mark Zuckerberg talk about the difficulty of doing business in Europe in general, but sort of in Germany specifically, and say, they got this regulation and that regulation, this thing and that thing. And I was like, have you ever thought about maybe applying that same line of thinking to American politics, which also maybe is slightly overregulated, but never seems to quite occur to those people. So, what sort of problems do you solve for your clients? Like, what's the thing they come to you with and say, okay, in the long term, yeah, I need advice and strategic input and all that. But like in the next 15 minutes, I need this urgent problem that I've got. What does that look like? I mean, obviously, I know you can't divulge particular details and things about people's businesses, but what sort of stuff lands in your desk with a great sense of, oh my God, can we fix this now?
Yeah, well, so the context for all of their requests is the fact that, and I know you understand this, the technologies that are going to decisively shape economies and societies and battlefields in the near future are overwhelmingly being developed in the private sector for commercial applications. So take things like artificial intelligence, right? It's not DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. It's not the DoD, the Defense Department, that's really pioneering AI at scale. It's the Googles and the OpenAIs and the Microsofts and all that. So that's one trend line. A related trend line is that a lot of, or a growing number of multinational technology companies now have interests and resources at a scale that previously was reserved for nation states.
Yeah.
And they exercise global influence. And they've worked really hard to achieve that, but they weren't ready for it. They didn't understand fully what they were kind of signing on to. And now those worlds are colliding and they're beginning to understand that, okay, there's a need now to exercise a type of leadership and influence on these issues, because there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. They're there, they're not going away, and those same trend lines are going to continue going forward for the foreseeable future. And so we pride ourselves on being a full service consulting firm, which essentially means we help our clients with whatever they need help with. Now, in my case, so I lead our global technology practice. And in my case, what that means is, helping navigate regulatory issues, but through a national security lens, right? So I'm not a regulatory lawyer or anything like that, but if there is an action that has a legitimate national security implication, we try to make sure that that the U.S. government understands that implication. If we see it and the client doesn't know it, we make sure they understand. Like, hey, listen, just understand if this rule is passed, it could mean this, degradation of cybersecurity norms or rules or capabilities. We should make sure people understand that. So, that's that's a part of our role. It's also, helping clients who just want to build a better relationship with the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. And not just purely from a sales perspective, but from hey, we're actually an American company. We're committed to being an American company. We want the United States to thrive and its people to prosper. The national security enterprise is this kind of black box. Can you help us navigate it? Like, map it. Who's who? And how can we be helpful? We don't know how, but we want to be. Okay, yeah, we can definitely do that.
So you're not lobbyists.
We're not lobbyists.
Your deliverable is not, we're going to kill this provision in subsection A of this bill that's under consideration.
We are not lobbyists.
So how do you measure success? How do you measure value for your clients? I mean, what you sell essentially, as I understand it, is advice.
Yeah.
A high-level advice, and advice that comes with some services for, putting together ways to contextualize and implement that advice, certainly. But it's not like, you're not a commission salesman. They give you a truckload of soap and you go out and sell it and say, I sold 8/10 of the truckload. That's right. And I'll sell the next 20% tomorrow. It's not something that seems obviously easy to quantify.
That's right. So the way we talk about it is I like to go to my clients and say, I want to find the problem that you have where if I fix it, it'll be 10 times the value of what I'm getting you to pay me. Like, bet the business problems is what we deal with. And typically, bet the business problems are problems you manage, not problems you solve. Or at least a lot of the time, that is the case. And then we help.
Give me a hypothetical example.
Okay. So right now there is a significant divergence between the way the United States is approaching a regulatory posture on something like artificial intelligence and the way the European Union is approaching it. Now, the context here, and this is very, well, you'll see. The grand strategy context is the United States is currently trying to renegotiate its global alliances with partners like the EU because of the point I made about how the influential role that technology is going to play. So we're actually trying to rebuild our alliances with entities like the European Union so that we have trusted communities within those two partners of data transfer and secure supply chains, right? We're moving supply chains out of China and we're trying to reconstitute them in trusted networks that would include democratic allies, frankly. And we're going to build whole new alliance organizations around those kinds of things because technology is so central. So we're trying. That's the goal. Well, in the midst of that, the United States is trying to wrap its brain around how it's going to deal with the disruptive and positive potentials of things like artificial intelligence and other technologies, as is the European Union. The problem is that increasingly it seems like our friends in Europe have concluded that if they don't want to miss out on this tech boom the way they have previously, that they have to constrain American technology companies and even pilfer them for intellectual property and resources and then transfer those to their own domestic champions.
Yeah, they're in a weird position where they want to be the regulatory superpower of the technology world, but they're home to essentially none of the relevant companies.
Precisely. And the negative feedback loop that creates then is that there's no industry voice domestically telling them like, whoa, bad idea. So they're just able to kind of like run free, and they are. And that's creating real diplomatic tensions between the United States because it's counterproductive for everybody. But it's rooted increasingly, it's becoming clear that it's rooted in a type of ideological worldview distinction, just some pretty fundamental differences in terms of how we understand the world. But it's something we have to solve. Okay, so that's context. So, my client has to navigate that. They have to understand, like, okay, we are trying to convince the EU that this strategy is actually quite harmful to business, which has downstream and significant economic impacts for them, which then makes them a less attractive and capable partner for the US government in the enterprise that it's trying to do kind of geopolitically. And so we help all those parties have that conversation, we try at least, in a sophisticated manner. Mm-hmm. Do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand the implications, both primary, secondary, and tertiary? And then, hey, U.S. government, like you have an interest in helping our friends figure this out. Oh, and by the way, you're taking these actions, which I think is inadvertently allowing or encouraging them to kind of do this. And then, oh, by the way, all of this is, as you guys are, kind of doing this internal firing squad, some very dangerous Chinese alternatives are sneaking in underneath this whole conversation and growing their market presence. And so it's our job to be incredibly sophisticated and better informed than everybody about all of that.
It's interesting the way your problem-solving options have evolved over the course of your career. I mean, you can't just now send a team of guys to kidnap Ursula von der Leyen and solve your problem. That's just not going to...
I have no comment on that idea.
Not going to do it. It's underway. We'll know who to look for when it happens. She seems like a very, very nice lady. Yeah. Before we close it up, technology-wise, what's the stuff that keeps you up at night? Like, what's your sleepless night, turning over in bed, this thing really, really worries me thing?
So this is where I want to employ the line of former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, where he says, "I don't lose sleep at night. I make other people lose sleep at night."
Yes, that's a good line.
It's much more meaningful and true in his case than it is mine. But
sure.
I really don't. when you kind of grow up in this business, I don't lose a lot of sleep, Number one, I'm kind of anesthetized to it. It's normal for me. And then two, I have a kind of a personal theology that just doesn't let me go there. I just,
You don't think there's a fair chance that one Thursday morning we get up and the electric grid doesn't work anymore?
No. Those threats are very real. I just have
you're just cool with it.
Well, I have an underlying piece that doesn't let me get too freaked out about
Okay.
it. Right? It just is. I'm not happy about it. I'm trying my best to avoid it.
Yeah.
Doing what I can to help avoid it. I worry most about the overall degradation of. It's not only social media, but this ubiquitous technology and media, and simultaneously we're more connected and more alone, and what that's doing to us as people and as a culture. I have very real concerns about that. I do technology for a living. I think my daughter, who's in college now, probably didn't get a phone until she was 17. And it was locked down.
Was that a hard negotiation?
Not with her. You happen to know her, so
Yeah.
she's peculiar. So she was not chomping at the bit for a phone, which actually made me feel much better about giving her one. But the other kids have opinions
Yeah.
on this matter, and
I'm just worried about how I'm going to negotiate this myself in the future.
So I worry about that from a more kind of hard national security perspective. We are perhaps more highly leveraged from a cybersecurity perspective than any other nation on the planet. So many of the things that we benefit, that makes life in the U.S. great, is also something that makes us vulnerable from a technological standpoint. And if you listen to open source hearings, you'll hear people like the Director of National Intelligence or the Director of the National Security Agency all say publicly that we are critically compromised by the Chinese or by the Russians. And they're right. And that's a really hard problem to solve. And I see that as being a persistent reality for a while.
You'd like to see your kids go into the same line of work that you're in, or would you rather see them do something else?
Okay, you're gonna have to check me on this. I like the John Adams quote, right? Like, what is it? I study war so that my son can study, or I study politics so that my son can study art. And
as the next generation gets to study agriculture, and then
That's
the
right.
ones after that get to study philosophy.
There you
and
go.
things like that.
If one of my kids said, "Hey, Dad, I want to do this," I'd be down with that. I can help them, but it's not my dream for them.
Yeah.
My increasingly my dream is live a quiet, peaceful life, provide and protect for your family, and enjoy the immense privilege that we have to be in this nation at this time. I mean, it's obscene. When you think about the history of the world, and when you think about what most people alive and who have ever lived have had to endure. And so I just try to teach them to be thankful for that, and the idea that they even have the privilege of being able to choose a career is just insane. And so I want them to be happy, and I want them to provide and protect.
But don't work on Capitol Hill.
I mean, I won't say don't, but I'll have opinions.
Right. Klon, thanks so much. I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks
Me
for
too.
coming by.
Thanks, man.